Philip Grover never called me into his office, not unless something was broken or on fire. So, when his assistant pinged me at 9:12 a.m., asking if I could step in for a quick conversation, I already knew. My name is Logan Merrick. I was the Midwest Logistics Manager for Vandrix Logistics based out of Columbus, Ohio. For nearly 9 years, I ran our regional freight operations, overseeing everything from dock schedules to client retention metrics. The warehouse still smelled like motor oil and concrete dust. I'd been helping Mike sort the Toledo shipment came in a day early when the message came through. I wiped my hands, left the scanner on the pallet stack, and walked the long hallway toward Philip's office, trying not to imagine how this conversation would end. He didn't offer me a seat, just closed the door behind me, then stood behind his desk, like someone trying to decide which mask to wear. "Logan," he began, "this isn't easy." I waited. Silence has a weight most managers can't carry. "There have been some concerns raised," he said. "Quality assurance flagged inconsistencies in your monthly metrics, your Q1 report specifically. Carla believes there may have been intentional inflation." I blinked. "She's accusing me of falsifying data." Philip flinched like I'd said something too real for a corporate conversation. "She submitted a written summary," he said. "She believes your delivery metrics are overstated. Not massively, but enough to question report integrity." "You want to see the documentation?" I asked calmly. "Every percentage point I submit is cross-referenced with fleet data, GPS confirmations, client sign-offs, and the live scan logs. I don't report guesses." He shook his head. "No, thank you, but no. This isn't an audit. We've reviewed the matter at leadership level, and, given the proximity of client renewals and the sensitivity of the optics, we have to make a decision." I already knew what that meant. "You're firing me." He took a breath. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. HR will reach out with severance details. Please return your badge to security." I felt it land not like a slap, but like ice water to the lungs. After 9 years of 60-hour weeks dock work in sub-zero winters, and keeping this company's freight division ranked number 2 statewide, they were cutting me loose over an office rumor. No review, no hearing, no call to verify my side. Just Carla Fenwick's suspicion and Philip Grover's cowardice. I reached into my back pocket and pulled the one-sheet performance summary I'd printed that morning. 97.8% on-time delivery, 6 months of consistent gains, 0 client complaints. Folded it in half, slipped it into my bag. Then I looked up and said, "I understand." Philip blinked. He was waiting for something pleading denial outburst, something to make it easier to justify what he'd just done. But I gave him nothing. He cleared his throat. "Security will escort you out." "Of course," I said. It was James who showed up. Night shift dock supervisor turned part-time security. We'd done holiday inventory together 3 years in a row. He didn't say much, just gave me that apologetic glance like a man who'd been ordered to escort a friend. I packed my thermal mug, my backup boots, the notepad I kept taped with routing notes, and the brass plaque I'd been awarded in 2019 for operational excellence, Vandrix Midwest Division. Then I walked past the team. Sarah Danner paused mid-step, clipboard in hand. Mike Cheney looked up from lane 3. Lena McCarthy turned instinctively toward Marcus Price. Confusion on every face. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. They knew me. They knew what I built here, and they knew this wasn't about numbers. It was about fear, envy, and Philip choosing the path of least resistance. Before I dive deeper, please comment where you're listening from, like and subscribe. The drive home was silent. No music, no traffic. Just the hum of my tires and the slow realization that, for the first time in nearly a decade, I didn't have to show up for anyone but myself. They thought they'd buried me with paperwork and protocol. But what they had actually done was set me free, and soon they'd understand the cost of that mistake. Danielle didn't ask anything right away. She just stared at me like the words couldn't compute. "You're home early." Got let go. Her hands were still on her laptop, but she didn't move. "Wait. What?" "Terminated. Effective immediately," I said, setting the manila envelope on the counter. "They said it was due to reporting inconsistencies." She blinked. "That's not even..." She cut herself off, then stood up slowly, crossed the kitchen, and took my face in both hands. "Look at me." "I did. You didn't do anything wrong." I nodded, but it didn't land. Not yet. My body was present. My mind was still pacing that loading dock. The severance packet was 8 weeks base pay, no reference, no Cobra assistance unless I signed the non-disparagement clause. The wording read like it had been copied from a template last, updated in 1994, detached, cold, designed by people who thought cleaning out your locker only happened to football players. I placed it in the junk drawer and closed it gently. Danielle followed. "Do you want to talk?" "No," I said. "I want to eat something, then sleep." It wasn't depression, not yet. It was numbness, like my operating system had been hard shut without warning. And now I was booting back up slowly, and nothing felt calibrated. The next morning, I found myself sitting in the garage staring at a freight routing map I used to keep pinned above my tool bench. It had push pins and color-coded lines showing supplier clusters across the Midwest green for priority vendors read for breakpoints. I hadn't looked at it in months. I used to update that thing every quarter. Danielle stood in the doorway with coffee. They fired a man with that level of precision. I managed a small laugh. "Do you think they even realize what they've lost?" "No," I said quietly, "but they will." I didn't touch the computer that weekend. I didn't open LinkedIn or message anyone back. What I did do was walk, think, breathe. I picked up groceries. I fixed the leaky bathroom valve I'd ignored for 6 months. Danielle started calling it Logan 2.0, but beneath the stillness, a storm was building. On Monday afternoon, I got a call from Marcus. "Hey, I know you probably don't want to talk about anything right now," he started, "but I just needed to say something." "Go ahead," I said. "You were the reason half of us stayed." I leaned back in my chair. "People noticed how things changed once you came in. You made that warehouse feel like it had standards again, like we weren't just pushing pallets to justify our paycheck. That's kind of you." "No, it's not kind, it's accurate. And now they've got Rick trying to run ops with a clipboard and a calendar app. He keeps calling the forklift inventory truck stuff. I don't even know what that means." I let out a breath. "Sounds about right." "Anyway," he said, his voice softening, "you didn't deserve what happened, and I'm not the only one who knows that. That call didn't fix anything, but it reminded me my reputation hadn't been erased. It had been released." The following evening, I logged into an old shared drive where I'd archived a few of my audit prep templates. Just seeing the folder structure, vendor risk flowcharts, delivery deviation, logs, Q1 performance KPIs, it calmed me. I remembered the version of myself who created those, focused, disciplined, respected. They fired that guy over a rumor. I opened a blank spreadsheet, for no reason, just instinct. The first line I typed wasn't a formula, it was a question. What do they lose without me? I stared at it for a while, then wrote the second, what do I gain if I don't go back? Somewhere between those two, I found the first real spark of clarity. Danielle knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Dinner's ready." I looked up. I think I'm starting to see it. "See what happens next?" She tilted her head. "Is this the part where you start plotting?" I smiled. "No, this is the part where I remember what I built, what they tried to bury." She studied me for a second. "You're not angry." I was. I'm not sure I am now. "Then what are you—" I looked back at the screen, the empty spreadsheet waiting. "Ready." I didn't send any angry emails. I didn't trash anyone online. But I did open my inbox and mark one email as unread. It was from a recruiter I'd ignored 2 months ago. Subject line, Cleveland-based logistics director, opportunity, confidential search. Suddenly that word confidential felt promising. I wasn't planning a comeback. I was planning something better, something no severance packet could erase. They thought firing me would silence me, but all it did was remind me where my power really was. And in the next part, I'd finally put that into motion. By the second week, the silence started to feel strange. Not just the absence of 6 a.m. warehouse texts or Malcolm's passive-aggressive meeting invites, but the real kind, the kind that seeps in when you realize the company that's discarded you so quickly hasn't replaced you at all. I still hadn't unpacked the last box from my desk. It sat in the corner of my home office like a scar open, half-sorted mocking. Inside was a framed photo of my old team at our peak late 2021, peak logistics chaos supply chains melting down, and us still delivering 96% on time. You can't fake that. Danielle caught me staring at it one afternoon. "You know," she said gently, "just because they buried your name doesn't mean your work didn't matter." I wanted to believe that, but I'd spent years building something tangible, and now I was just gone. No LinkedIn post, no announcement, just deleted. Until my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail, then another. This time it was Sarah. Hey Nathan, I know you're probably not answering calls from anyone with a Midraxis email, but just wanted to say it's been rough since you left. Real rough. I listened to the rest twice. Rick Sandler, that was the name. Malcolm's brilliant replacement. A former warehouse compliance consultant from Milwaukee who, according to Sarah, spoke in acronyms and didn't know where the emergency forklift keys were kept. She didn't outright ask for help, but she didn't have to. 2 days later, I ran into Tom Bradley, our old maintenance supervisor, at a gas station off I-480. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. They really let you go? He finally asked. On a rumor, I said. Didn't even blink. He shook his head. Well, they're blinking now. Hard. He told me one of our biggest accounts, Wendell Automotive, had called twice in a week to complain about delivery routing errors. Said they were considering alternatives. That's when the shift started. Not revenge, not even strategy yet, just attention, whispers, the kind that don't make headlines but travel faster than press releases in our industry. When a vendor asked Danielle through her firm if I was still consulting, that was the moment I realized something deeper was happening. They weren't just curious, they were watching how Midraxis handled my absence. They weren't impressed. Meanwhile, I'd started keeping a notebook handwritten, nothing digital. 1 page per name. Every person who ever made that operation run. Not just job titles, but what made them matter. Lisa Rodriguez knew how to reroute shipments around weather delays faster than dispatch. Mike Cheney, forklift specialist who could calculate square footage utilization in his head. Devin Price, quiet genius with workflow timing, who never got credit because he didn't play office politics. And then there was Marcus, analyst, underrated, MBA from Purdue, spoke in numbers when the room only respected noise. None of them had called me, not yet, but I'd written their names anyway, not as targets, as reminders. I didn't want revenge. I wanted gravity, to feel like the center again, not for ego, but because I knew what I'd built, and I knew who would feel it most when it cracked. One night in early April, I got an email from a personal address I didn't recognize. Subject line, Midraxis support team inquiry. Inside just one line. Heard what happened. I have a proposal. Can we talk? No signature, but the address belonged to someone I hadn't heard from in 4 years. Julian Vega, Regional VP at Altera Freight Systems. The company Midraxis always mocked as low-tech but scrappy. We'd crossed paths back in 2019 during a failed bid. I beat him for the North Star Parts contract, but he respected how clean my operation ran. That night, we'd had beers after the pitch-talking shop. Said if I ever left Midraxis to give him a call. Apparently, he'd been watching the storm form, too. I closed the email, stared at the subject line again, and said out loud, "Now that is interesting." I hadn't replied yet, not because I wasn't interested, but because I wanted to see what would happen next. It wasn't just that people were talking. It was who was listening. What Julian offered next would change everything, but it wasn't just the offer. It was who else had already said yes. Julian Vega didn't waste time with pleasantries. We met at a quiet little cafe near the freight corridor in Akron, one of those places with chipped mugs and burnt coffee that smelled like diesel and hard choices. He sat across from me in a navy jacket, no tie, tablet in hand. And that kind of intensity that meant something real was coming. You built Vandrix's reputation, he said, not as a compliment, but as fact. I've been watching your team's metrics for years. They were impossible to miss. I stirred the bitter coffee. Not my team anymore. Julian didn't blink. They will be, or something better. He laid it out plainly. Altera Freight Systems had been expanding aggressively, trying to fill the vacuum Midraxis left behind when their QA division got tangled in a federal procurement dispute. With key clients hesitant to renew, Julian had pushed Altera to bid fast restructure faster, and now he needed someone who could actually execute. I want you to rebuild our Midwest operations, he said. Start with Cleveland. You'll have budget control hiring authority and board-level access to procurement planning. I'm not offering a job, Logan. I'm offering a freight empire. I didn't say anything for a moment. A month ago, I was folding my company hoodie into a box while Carla Fenwick pretended she hadn't signed the memo. Now a competitor was offering me a blueprint to dismantle them. Why now, I asked. Julian leaned forward. Because your name still means something. Because I've had 3 vendors mention that your reports were the only ones they ever trusted. and because Malcolm's team just delayed a Tier 1 contract shipment by 17 hours, and they're about to get audited. That last part landed. 17 hours. Back at Vandrix, that would have meant calls at midnight cold coffee at 2 a.m., forklifts running overtime, and me standing in a reflective vest in the dark, making damn sure the docks were cleared. Now no one was standing there, and clients were noticing. I let the silence stretch. "Say I agree," I finally said. "I'm not poaching people. I'm not out for some scorched earth campaign." Julian smiled thin, knowing. Good. I don't need a fire starter. I need a builder. But if competent people happen to walk toward better leadership, who are we to stop them? I thought about Sarah still holding that department together with duct tape and hope. I thought about Devin, who had more sense than half of Midraxis's board, but was still getting passed over because someone thought he was too quiet. I thought about the vendor call I got last week, just catching up. They said, but I heard it clearly in the subtext. "Where are you going next, and can we follow?" Danielle had asked me that same night. "Do you want to get even, or do you want to get better?" At the time, I didn't have an answer. Now I was starting to see the difference. Julian slid the tablet across to me. "Compensation starts at 165. We'll negotiate the rest. But I need an answer in 2 weeks. And Logan," he paused as if measuring the weight of the next words, "don't rebuild what you had. Build what they were too small to imagine." I walked out with the tablet under my arm, the coffee still bitter in my throat. Downtown Akron was quiet, but I kept hearing names in my head. Devin, Sarah, Lena, Tom. Not just colleagues, not pawns. People who deserved better. I didn't call Julian that night, or the next. I sat with it. I asked myself questions I wasn't ready to answer out loud. What does rebuilding mean when the foundation was ripped out beneath you? What does loyalty mean when no one showed it back? Danielle left a note on my desk the third night. "Build the place you always wished you'd worked. I believe in that guy. So do I. But I needed to be sure. Because once I stepped forward, there would be no stepping back. And I wasn't just accepting an offer, I was declaring intent. They thought the worst thing they could do was fire me. They forgot I remembered how the whole system was built. I didn't say yes right away. Julian had offered the kind of role that came with freedom most ops managers never saw: blank budget, direct vendor access, clean slate. But it wasn't the title that made me hesitate. It was the weight of it, the clarity. The moment I accepted, there'd be no pretending I wasn't at war. Danielle knew before I did. "You've already decided," she said, setting down her tea. "You're just making sure you can live with it." She was right. I emailed Julian 2 hours later. Subject: re-offer body. "Let's build it right this time." Attachment: initial territory map annotated. His reply came in 4 minutes. On it, "Legal is clearing your procurement access this afternoon." That afternoon, I opened the old spreadsheet I thought I'd never see again. Doc schedules. Tier 1 performance ratings. The vendor satisfaction matrix I used to update every Friday before Carla streamlined the process into oblivion. My hands hovered for a second. Then muscle memory took over. I'd forgotten how it felt to build something from scratch. Not react, not defend, just design. Altira's legal sent over the employment clause, matrix clean, tight, well considered. 2 bullet points stood out. No direct solicitation for 60 days. No engagement with clients under active NDA unless the client initiates contact. Julian had made sure the door stayed open. All I had to do was not knock first. Still, there was one thing I couldn't build alone. I scrolled through my contacts, paused over a name I hadn't tapped in weeks. Devin Price. Last I heard, he was still at Vandrix, keeping his head down, doing twice the work for half the credit. The kind of guy you don't notice until he's gone and then nothing works right. I didn't text. I just sent him a link to a shared doc labeled New Ops Stack, confidential, no explanation, just that. He opened it within 10 minutes. Then he added a comment next to the legacy flow design. Still using the price pivot maneuver. I laughed out loud. That maneuver saved a 12 contract when Vandrix nearly double-booked a shipment in Omaha. Devin had rigged the loadout and saved the day, but Carla had taken the credit on the exec call. I still remembered his face when he found out. I typed back, "You still using the server I mirrored in 2022? He didn't reply, but the doc lit up with activity. That was his yes. I remembered the night we sat on crates eating vending machine chips after a 17-hour offload, when I told him he'd lead the department one day. I wasn't wrong. Vandrix just never gave him the chance. Now, we'd build something better. And this time, no one would erase our names from the credits. I didn't need to fight back. I just needed them to remember who built it. If this resonates with you, please like and subscribe. That night, Danielle found a note slipped into the side pocket of the moving box labeled Vandrix, Misc. It was handwritten on scrap paper. Build the place you always wished existed. I'll help. I hadn't written it. Devin had months ago during our last team review. I must have stuffed it in the box without thinking. Now it sat beside my laptop as I rebuilt the vendor map from memory. By the time I shut the spreadsheet, 3 old vendors had already reconnected on LinkedIn. One of them, he just typed, "Heard what happened. Let's talk." The first message came at 7:42 a.m., buried in a stack of onboarding approvals and internal Altira requests. Subject, rechecking in. From Janet Morrison, procurement lead. North Corridor, freight message. Heard you landed somewhere better. Can we talk quietly? That was it. No greeting, no signature line. Just the kind of message that carried weight because it didn't try to. 3 months ago, Janet was stuck in every Thursday escalation call at Vandrix, her tone flat, her patience short, but her integrity untouchable. She wasn't warm, but she was fair, and she knew the system. I read her email 3 times, then once more just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. By noon we were on a call. No cameras, no small talk. "I'll get right to it," she said. "Phil's been saying you tried to poach our routes, and I know that's crap. He's scared." Philip Grover, my old direct supervisor, the man who smiled through my suspension and let Carla Fenwick run the narrative that I was too close to Devin and the vendor teams. I didn't answer. I let her keep going. 3 vendors are weeks late. Warehouse ops are backlogged. One of them mentioned your name. You never reached out, did you? I didn't have to. Janet let out a quiet laugh. I knew it. You were the glue. He never saw it. There was a beat of silence before she said the thing I hadn't let myself hope for. We're opening the Northern Corridor bid again. If Altira throws a hat in, I'll make sure it lands where it should. I kept my voice even, but my chest felt like it had been punched and filled with air all at once. Janet, don't thank me, just make sure it's clean. No links to prior partnerships. I'll handle the procurement audit. After the call, I sat back and stared at my screen. Devin's name blinked at the top of a Slack thread. Lena McCarthy had just uploaded a sample routing map. Sarah had commented twice on the new load tracking dashboard. The infrastructure was forming. I'd spent weeks laying the foundation in silence. No hard solicitations, just shared workflows, open source templates, a quiet series of, "Hey, check this out" moments. But now the first bridge had lowered. Danielle peeked her head into the study. "You're smiling," she said. I hadn't noticed. "Was it the new guy, Julian?" "No," I said. "It was an old one, Janet." She didn't ask questions, but I saw the way she looked at me. Careful, curious, like she wasn't sure if I was rising or unraveling. Later that night, I reopened the doc Devin had sent. The title bar read, Phase 2, Shadow Ops. Underneath it, a checklist. ITSIS, Parallel Routing Map, Lena, Load Verification Sync, Mike, Vendor Response Index, Sarah, Legacy Compliance Clause, Archive, Logan. I hovered over that last line. My own name, my own clause. See, I never shared the clause openly at Vandrix, but I'd written it, slipped it into our internal policy 2 years ago during a restructure. It granted routing independence for overflow corridors, but only under non-exclusive contract definitions. That clause meant Altira could run the same routes without violating a thing. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was a blueprint. And the best part, the clause was still public, still searchable, still technically owned by Vandrix, but authored by me, which meant if they tried to sue the record, would lead right back to my employee ID and timestamp. I didn't burn the bridge, I whispered. I built another one underneath it. Danielle was asleep by then. The house was still. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was about to call, someone I hadn't expected. It was only a matter of time. They weren't just losing people. They were about to lose something bigger, and the person calling next, he was never supposed to know I was still in the game. 2 weeks after Janet's email, it happened. I got a calendar invite labeled Logistics Review 3PL Shift Strategy, sent by someone I hadn't seen in 3 years. The sender was Denise Lockhart, Regional Head of Freight Operations for Orion Staples Vandrix's second largest client. At first I thought it was a mistake, but the body of the email was direct. "Logan, we're exploring new fulfillment partnerships. Your name came up. Can we talk?" That wasn't just a breadcrumb. That was a flare in the dark, the kind of message that once seen couldn't be unseen. And the call that followed, it wasn't exploratory. It was surgical. Denise didn't mince words. We're pulling out, full scale within 60 days. Frankly, your departure was the first red flag. The new guys fumbled 2 lanes in just 8 weeks. That's millions in downstream exposure. She paused. I'd prefer not to list you as the reason, but off the record, you were the reason we stuck around this long. That was the moment the air shifted. Not because of what she said, but because I didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. I hung up and stared at my screen. The same terminal where I used to patch late-night routing bugs. Same keyboard where I'd written the internal manifest protocol 2 years ago, the one they were now botching daily. And then it hit me. They weren't just losing contracts. They were losing memory. The people who knew how the machine ran had already left, and the ones trying to fix it were too proud to ask for help, or too blind to know where to start. The irony, when I filed the original redundancy clause, I'd added a note in the changelog, a single-line comment under the threshold setting. Do not adjust without loopback audit, ask Logan. I saw a screenshot of that comment in a Reddit thread later that week. Someone from Vandrix's dev team had posted it in frustration. Who the hell is Logan, the caption read. That's when I laughed out loud for the first time in months. I didn't need revenge headlines. I didn't want applause. I just wanted them to say my name again. And now, they didn't even know how to spell it. Later that night, Devin texted me. Check Slack. Philip's in meltdown mode. Lena said he just reversed 2 approvals and blamed the interns. That tracks. Philip had always been quick to bark downward when pressure moved in. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the procurement dashboard Julian and I had built quietly in the background, using open-source load balancing logic I'd repurposed from the Vandrix Ghost server farm. Janet was already uploading their shipment specs. The switch was happening, not later. Now. And I kept thinking about that box I left behind. The one with the half-taped corner. Danielle once asked why I never unpacked it. You really think you're going back? I didn't answer then. But now I understood. That box wasn't unfinished. It was the beginning of the exit. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. They say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I didn't hate Vandrix anymore. I just couldn't care less what happened next. But part of me wondered, would they finally connect the dots? Would they see the vendor audit trail, the contract clauses, the redirections? Or would they just keep tripping over the wires I left behind? I didn't need to fight back. I just needed them to remember who built it. If this resonates with you, please like and subscribe. Because next, the last signature was about to land, and it wasn't going to come from Vandrix. 3 months after I walked out of Vandrix, I sat on the quiet side of the trade show floor in Indianapolis, nursing a lukewarm coffee and watching the house banners get wheeled into place for the morning session. My badge said Altira Freight Systems now, but most of the vendors, logistics directors, and independent shippers still just called me Logan, like nothing had changed. Only everything had. Because 2 hours later, the doors opened and Philip Grover and Carla Fenwick walked in like ghosts of a party no one invited. Vandrix had lost its booth sponsor. The original keynote slot had been reassigned, and from the look on Carla's face, they'd just been told by a vendor that another client had pulled a contract. By that point, it wasn't even surprising. Since I'd left, they'd lost 3 major clients I used to personally manage. The last one, a regional fuel distributor, had sent in a termination notice with a single sentence. We are transferring our operations to an entity better aligned with our reliability goals. That entity was Altira, and the project manager was Devin Price, formerly my junior ops lead, now my operations director. I don't say this to brag, but Devin was the kind of guy who used to stay late every Friday with me rebuilding our route logic when storms knocked out half our delivery corridor. Vandrix didn't even remember his name when I left. They do now. There's a strange silence that comes with watching a company crumble. It's not the kind of Hollywood collapse where windows shatter and alarms go off. It's quieter, more surgical, more like watching someone bleed from a wound they still don't realize is fatal. That morning I got the proof. One of our vendors, an old contact from back in the Vandrix days, forwarded me a Slack screenshot, accidentally CC'd from Philip's team. It read, "Do not reference Logan Merrick by name. Any mention of his transition to Altira will be treated as a breach of internal separation protocol. Carla Effie." That was the first time I laughed in weeks. I never once reached out to their clients. I never poached a single lead. But I'd spent 5 years building trust, solving impossible problems, answering calls at 11 p.m., when weather delayed a critical shipment of hospital-grade lithium backups. That kind of equity doesn't disappear just because someone launches a rumor. It just gets transferred. I still remember the day Carla looked me in the eye and said, "You're too emotionally involved in client relationships. That's not scalable." Now they were holding meetings about emotional fallout and retention attrition. Funny how scale works. What they never understood, what they couldn't understand, was that the system I built wasn't just software or contracts. It was people. It was consistency. It was trust. You can't replace that with Philip's spreadsheets and a junior account rep reading off a script. Back at the expo, I spotted Lena McCarthy near the concession tables, another quiet defector. She raised her coffee to me like we were in on a secret. We were, because by then, 3 of the 8 largest carriers at Vandrix had signed partnership memos with Altira. Not because I asked, but because they remembered how we delivered when no one else could. They remembered who built the process. And more importantly, they remembered who didn't. It was the moment I realized I didn't need revenge. I just needed to be visible long enough for the cracks to show. Have you ever watched someone try to hold together a lie that's unraveling faster than they can spin it? That was Philip on the expo floor, smiling, waving, ignoring every sideways glance. That smile got tighter when Devin took the stage as a panel guest, and even tighter when he introduced me as the person who taught me what operational integrity actually looks like. I didn't gloat, I didn't wave, I just listened. And when Devin finished his panel, he handed me a printout, a new multi-year service agreement. 3 vendors, all former Vandrix partners, all switching, right there in writing. I folded it into my bag. No rush, no victory dance. Just the quiet realization that the room wasn't laughing at me anymore. They were looking at Vandrix like it had expired, the same way Philip used to look at me. So, here's the real question. When the people they underestimated start running the game, what happens to the ones who built their legacy on rumor? And what Philip didn't know yet was that the biggest reveal hadn't even happened. 2 weeks after the expo, Julian Vega called me. He didn't waste time. "Logan," he said, "we just received a leak, internal procurement memo from Vandrix. It's bad." He forwarded it to me. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then reached for the coffee I never drank. It was real. A flagged audit report, redacted but clear enough. Vandrix had tried to fast-track vendor approvals to fill their service gaps, no credential checks, no legal review. One of the vendors was already blacklisted in 3 states. Another was a shell company without shipping licenses. Someone at Vandrix had tried to backdate the onboarding paperwork. They failed. The metadata exposed the edit trail immediately. At the bottom of the thread, from cfinwikavandrixlogistics.com to pgrovera.vandrixlogistics.com, subject urgent containment strategy. Whatever Merrick is doing, it's working. If this memo hits press, we'll have to get ahead of it. Suggest narrative pivot, emphasize new leadership focus. That line stuck with me, new leadership focus. They were prepping a scapegoat. Philip might have even volunteered. That's how bad it was. Julian asked, "Want us to move it up the chain?" Quietly. I didn't answer right away. I went for a walk. There's a trail behind Altira's building Gravel River on one side, Skyline on the other. When I first joined, I'd walk it just to breathe, to try and forget what I left behind, to stop wondering if silence was the right move. Now I knew better. Carla once told me, "You're too emotionally involved in client relationships. That's not scalable." Turns out neither was she. I didn't leak the memo, but I didn't stop Julian either. Some truths don't need a bullhorn, just the right inbox. 4 days later, the bulletin landed. Vandrix procurement lapse. Sparks client exodus. No names, no dramatics. Just cold facts, timeline, vendor data. Quotes from unnamed executives referencing compliance breach and delivery risk. By Friday, Vandrix's board called a closed-door session. Publicly, it was strategic realignment. Privately, Philip was negotiating his resignation. Carla was already gone. Devin printed the report and slid it across my desk. They're calling it a leadership refresh. I didn't even smile, just nodded. Devin paused, then asked, "Do you think they ever understood who the clients were loyal to?" I looked over at the Altira board, 8 accounts finalized, 3 more pending. Nearly a third of them used to belong to Vandrix. They didn't care, I said, until it started costing them. Devin nodded, and now, they care. That night, I opened a box I hadn't touched since the day I was fired. Inside was my old Vandrix badge, bent lanyard, peeling logo. Logan Merrick, Senior Operations Manager. I used to wear that like armor, like it meant something. Now it just reminded me how small they thought I was. I left it on my desk, because in the end I didn't sabotage them. I didn't campaign. I didn't chase revenge. I just stopped holding them up. And when the rumors dried out, so did their credibility. But Carla hadn't vanished. She'd rebranded, formed a consulting firm under a new LLC, quietly repositioning herself in regional logistics. And that morning, Devin handed me a new contract. 3 vendors, all switching over, signed by Carla Fenwick. She had no idea who owned the freight certification board she'd just submitted to. Altira, and the man across the table, was me. So, here's the question. What happens when Carla Fenwick, the one who fired you over a rumor, walks into your boardroom and sees your name on the signature line? It happened quietly. No press release, no stage lights, just a Tuesday meeting in a glass-walled conference room at Altira's regional HQ. Julian Vega was already seated when I walked in, calm, unreadable sipping, something that looked like herbal tea, but probably wasn't. Devin sat beside him, flipping through a printout like he hadn't already memorized every line. The folder they slid across the table was thick. Legal pads, summary terms. A cover page titled Strategic Advisory and Infrastructure Expansion Proposal. It was everything I used to wish for at Vandrix: a seat at the table, authority to shape the network, a budget line with my name on it. But the part that caught me wasn't the offer. It was the line near the bottom of page 2. Point of contact for consolidated vendor migration, Logan Merrick. I must have read that 3 times. Those vendors weren't just names on a spreadsheet. They were the same ones Carla used to dismiss as legacy headaches. The same accounts Philip refused to prioritize unless a CFO complained loud enough. Now they were asking for me by name. I looked up at Julian. He didn't smile, just nodded once like this was all inevitable. "We don't just want your brain," he said. "We want the system. The one you used to make broken things run smooth." He paused. "And we want you to build it without having to fight upstream every damn day." I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the edge of the folder. Devin broke the silence. "You remember the depot fire 2 years ago?" he asked almost too casually. I nodded. Of course I remembered. Emergency reroutes, medical supplies, Christmas shipments, all saved by a patchwork plan we'd built in 19 sleepless hours. Not one person from Vandrix mentioned that. During my exit, I said. Devin tapped the page again. Altira did. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't about getting back at anyone. This wasn't revenge dressed as a promotion. It was restoration. Not just of a role, but of meaning. I picked up the pen, then paused. "You know Philip and Carla will see this, eventually," I said. Julian shrugged. "They already have. Carla's procurement team was CC'd on the vendor exit memo last Friday. She called our CFO the next morning. And she asked if the transition could be paused. He told her talk to Logan." I didn't smile. I just signed. A week later, we were back in Indianapolis. This time not for a trade show, but for the National Freight Operations Consortium Summit. Altira had secured a keynote roundtable. Devin would moderate. I'd be the closing segment. As I walked toward the stage, I passed the Vandrix booth. Empty. Unbranded, just a folding table and a staffer pretending to read a brochure. No Philip, no Carla. I kept walking. There was a moment during the roundtable mid-discussion about contingency routing during climate disruptions when a hand went up in the audience. Vendor badge. Familiar face. He asked, "Logan, when you talk about system integrity, are you referring to policy compliance or the people enforcing it?" I paused, then answered the only way I knew how. "Both," I said, "because if people don't trust the person behind the policy, then the system's already broken." Devin nodded beside me. Julian gave a rare smile. That was the moment it landed. Not just the offer, but the understanding. I hadn't just rebuilt my career. I'd rebuilt the rules. The old ones said, play along, keep quiet, don't challenge the story. The new ones, they had my name at the bottom of the page. After the panel, I packed up my things. Devin lingered by the exit. "You good?" he asked. I thought for a second, then pulled something from my bag. It was my old Vandrix badge, still clipped to the lanyard they made me turn in. I'd found it in a desk drawer months ago. Thought I'd tossed it. But I hadn't. I held it up, then let it fall gently into the trash by the door. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." Because I finally understood something I hadn't back then. It was never about clearing my name. It was about making sure it meant something again. So, when the system comes full circle, When you finally get handed the power you used to beg for, what do you do with it? The funny thing is, I never got an apology. Not from Philip, not from Carla, not from the board member who called me volatile after the rumors started spreading, and definitely not from the anonymous sender who started it all. But I got something better. About 2 weeks after the expo, an industry newsletter landed in my inbox. I almost skipped it, those things usually read like recycled press releases. But the headline caught my eye. Vandrix leadership under review after sudden loss of key clients. Buried 3 paragraphs in was a name Julian Vega, Altira's new COO, my boss, the man who'd handed me a second chance without asking for a blood oath. Julian had been quoted saying, "Operations aren't built on volume, they're built on trust. And when trust erodes, systems collapse from the inside out." I read that line 3 times, because that's what I'd spent 5 years trying to explain to people like Carla. That logistics isn't just moving freight, it's moving belief in people, in timing, in the quiet systems no one notices until they stop working. Vandrix didn't just lose business, they lost belief. And that's what finally broke them. A week later, Lena McCarthy forwarded me a screenshot from an internal Slack message, this time from the Vandrix board. Effective immediately, Carla Fenwick has been placed on administrative leave pending compliance review. No explanation, no details, just silence. Philip didn't respond publicly, but a friend at Midwest Carriers told me he'd been relocated to a non-operational role, which in Vandrix speak meant wait out your contract in a quiet corner and don't make waves. I should have felt victorious, but I didn't. Instead, I kept thinking about that badge I'd handed over on my last day, the one with the bent corner and my name half faded. I'd carried it for years, through midnight reroutes, vendor meltdowns, winter storms. Through the week, I missed my niece's recital because a hospital shipment got delayed, and I drove the last 80 miles myself. Back then, I thought loyalty was the job. But loyalty only works if it's mutual. That's what I learned. Devin stopped by my desk that Friday with a coffee. No big speech, just a nod. We got confirmation, 3rd wave's coming over next month. He meant the final set of carriers, all confirmed, all switching. Altira would officially absorb everything I used to manage and more. And I'd be overseeing it all, quietly, no title changes, no press release. Just a systems architect doing the job the right way. "I don't get how you stayed quiet through all of it," Devin said, glancing out the window. "I wasn't trying to be quiet," I said. "I was trying to be heard in the right places." That's the difference. That's the part they never understood. This was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving I never needed to lie to be right. Later that day, I opened the drawer where I keep my old name badges, the ones from every company I ever worked for. Vandrix was still there, still bent, still faded. I didn't throw it away. I just moved it to the back of the drawer, because some lessons don't need to be framed or burned. They just need to be remembered. The real revenge wasn't watching them fail. It was knowing I didn't have to destroy anything. All I had to do was show what I'd quietly built, and watch the difference. But before it all ended, one last message came in, this time from someone I never expected. The last time I heard Carla Fenwick's name, it was during a coffee break with Julian Vega. He just shook his head, half smiling. "She's consulting now," he said. "Compliance workshops, mostly remote." No one had said my name in those conversations. Not publicly, not in the trade journals, not even in the write-up about Vandrix losing 2 of their anchor contracts in Q1. But behind the silence, I could feel the shape of what remained. Philip Grover was no longer with the company. The press release said, pursuing new opportunities, which was their way of not saying the board got tired of bleeding market share. Devin told me the turnover rate on their ops floor hit 30%. Clients weren't just drifting, they were jumping. And the only thing more noticeable than the absence of Vandrix at events was the absence of anyone defending them. I thought I'd feel something bigger, relief, satisfaction, maybe even triumph, but mostly I just felt still. There's a moment that sticks with me now more than any of it. Back when I was packing up my desk the morning they let me go, I was holding my badge still clipped to the lanyard, and I remember thinking, did they just erase 5 years with one rumor? Turns out, they didn't. Because trust doesn't live in systems or policies. It lives in memory, in the late-night emails, the silent fixes, the weekends someone noticed you stayed. That lanyard's still in my drawer, not because I'm sentimental, but because it reminds me I don't have to prove anything anymore. They already know. I didn't burn bridges, I didn't leak documents, I didn't fight back in the way they expected. I just stayed visible long enough for the truth to catch up. So, when people ask what I got out of it, what I really wanted, I don't say revenge. I say continuity. I wanted to keep doing what mattered with people who remembered how it felt to be led by someone who actually gave a damn. And now, I am. You ever have someone try to delete your name like it never existed, only to find out the ones who mattered never forgot? That's the legacy I built. Quiet, steady, real. Turns out you don't need to scream to be remembered. You just need to show up when it counts and wait. Share your own experiences. Like and subscribe for more stories.